Welcome to another edition of Legal Face Off on WGN Radio. Of course, we have Tina Martini of McDermott, Will and Emery, and Rich Lenkoff from Downey and Lenkoff. I'm your moderator, Ryan Burrow. Kamala Harris now appears to be at the top of the ticket for the Democrats this November, but there still may be some legal hurdles the Harris campaign faces. Neama Rahmani is the president and co-founder of West Coast Trial Lawyers. He's a former federal prosecutor. He's done some election law in LA. You may have seen him on Inside Edition, CNN, BBC, Fox News, just to name a few. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, Ryan. Thanks for having me as always.
So as of literally this morning, Republicans are still questioning Kamala's ability to step in for Biden. One argument that they're making is that FEC, Federal Election Commission rules, dictate that she cannot access Biden's campaign funds. Will that argument succeed?
I don't think so, for two reasons, both procedurally and substantively. Substantively, it was a joint campaign committee. Harris's name was on the committee. So presumably, it's like having a joint account. Anyone can access the funds. And procedurally, the FEC is so backed up on their enforcement actions, there's absolutely no way that anything is going to be done before the election. And even if it were, we're talking about a 3 Republican and 3 Democrat gridlock commission. And of course, there's going to be appeals that can take it out of the administrative process and in court. So it's a losing argument, both on the substance and the procedure.
About the argument that electors voted for Biden to be the candidate and not Harris, and that a few party insiders are now picking her, which is undemocratic.
Well, the undemocratic argument isn't necessarily a legal argument, and political parties have a lot of control over who they nominate. They can make the rules and they can change those rules. This actually came out in some of the 14th Amendment Section 3 litigation, trying to keep Trump off the ballot for being an insurrectionist. And there were some judges that said, well, even if he can't hold office, parties can nominate who they want. Now, obviously, we'd have to go through each state's election laws to see if that argument holds water, but I think it's going to be very tough. Biden was never the nominee. The DNC hasn't even happened yet. So those delegates, even if they're pledged delegates, can vote for whomever they want.
Another argument being made in particular this week by Speaker Mike Johnson is that the campaign, now with Harris as the head, will have trouble meeting deadlines imposed by several states, including some battleground states like Georgia, Nevada, Wisconsin. What do you make of that argument?
Yeah, so we saw this in Ohio, and they had to push their deadline back. The DNC is late this year. Coincidentally, fortunately, however you want to say it. But that's a different argument. There are state deadlines to put someone on the ballot. And regardless of whether it's Biden, Harris, or someone else, those deadlines have to be met. So if Democrats can't meet those deadlines, Speaker Johnson may have an argument there.
But I think just to your point, and what a lot of people, I didn't know really, to be honest, before this week, is that the Democratic Party is a private entity, and there's no constitutional rule about this, and they can change their rules, and the likelihood that they will not do that in the face of what everyone agrees is the candidate is almost nil, right? I mean, that doesn't mean that Republicans aren't going to sue because of it, right? But I mean, the chances of that litigation being successful is pretty minimal, right?
Oh, that's absolutely right. The bottom line is, like we said, this is a private entity. They can make whatever rules they want. They can change those rules. Might be unfair, might be undemocratic, but that's not a legal basis to challenge who becomes the Democratic nominee. That's why this argument is a long shot, has very little chance of success. But we know Trump can be very litigious. That hasn't stopped him before.
Neema, will any of this be playing out at the convention? As you mentioned, the convention's pretty late this year. So do you think that this is still going to be kicked around in the next several weeks, or do you think these issues are going to be resolved by then?
I wouldn't be surprised if Trump, the RNC, or even the Heritage Foundation has come out and they've raised some questions about this switch. So I expect a lawsuit to be filed. I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet, frankly. Probably next week. They're probably trying to find some sort of precedent. And of course, this is very unprecedented for a challenge here. But I think this is something that ultimately will be unsuccessful. But I expect that challenge to be raised and for it to be an issue and to be unresolved by the time the DNC rolls around.
Last question here, Neama. We appreciate it. Is that, as we often say with these stories, you can't ever look at it, even though we're a legal show, you can't ever look at it only from a legal prism without considering politics. Kamala certainly has some momentum now coming out of this announcement. Do you think there is the political will to support a challenge like this? Again, there's certainly many on the Republican side who are going to support such litigation, but overall, is your sense that there's the political will among the electorate and courts to take up this challenge, or not? Or is it too early to say?
I do, and this is why. We saw it with the 14th Amendment litigation in almost every state. Democrats challenged Trump's ability to be on the ballot. Most of those challenges failed for a number of reasons. Obviously, Trump wasn't charged with insurrection, much less convicted. And we talked about the political party issue, but there was at least one state Supreme Court, Colorado, by a narrow margin. There were 7 democratically appointed judges, 4-3. They kept Trump off the ballot. And obviously that was overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court. But I think there is the stomach in this polarized climate to try to make, even though it won't have much of a chance of success, to try to make a long shot effort to keep Kamala Harris off the ballot.
And to that point, there certainly is a stomach at the Supreme Court. Who would have thought that they'd be divided on the question of immunity, right, a few months ago? So there is perhaps some appetite by the Supreme Court to take up this issue should it get that far.
Oh, I agree completely. And regardless of what side you're on, there are many Republicans that think that Trump has been treated unfairly by our justice system. And I'm sure they would try and want to enact some vengeance through our legal system. Again, I don't think it's going to work, but I don't think it's going to stop folks from trying.
Neama Rahmani, thank you so much for joining us on Legal Face Off.
No, thanks for having me.
Rich Lenkov